She hid him at the altar, in front of the elders, in front of the council, in front of everyone, not because she lost control, because she finally found it. She drove her wedding heel into his shoulder, while the ceremonial hall erupted around her, and then she ran. Full wedding dress, bare feet, wolves already searching. One deserted road, one abandoned carriage. No choice. She threw herself inside and thought she was alone. She was not alone. When she looked up and saw the boots, she grabbed the only weapon she had left, her other heel. It hit his chest. He tilted his head and smiled, because he knew exactly who she was, and she knew exactly who he was. The one man whose instincts should have ended her escape before it began. Instead, he hid her and never told her why. The morning of Julissa Hendrick's wedding arrived the way all terrible things do, quietly. No thunder, no warning crack in the sky, just pale gray light pushing through the narrow windows of her childhood bedroom, and the sound of her mother's footsteps in the hallway, quick and purposeful, the kind that said, "Today is the day and there is no turning back." Julissa sat at the edge of her bed in her thin cotton slip, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. The wedding dress hung on the back of the door like a ghost waiting for a body. It was a beautiful gown. Everyone said so. Ivory silk, hand-stitched with silver thread along the neckline, the kind of dress that caught candlelight and turned it into something sacred. Her mother had cried when she first tried it on. Her father had nodded once, that slow, deliberate nod that meant, "Good, this is good. This is exactly what we needed." What they needed. That was always how her family spoke about this marriage. Not what Julissa needed. Not what Julissa wanted. What the family needed. What the Hendricks name needed. What their crumbling estate and their mounting debts and their fading social standing all desperately needed. Gregory Lambert, heir to the Lambert fortune. First son of Elder Conrad Lambert, one of the most powerful men in the Northern Pack Council. Owner of 3 estates, a fleet of trading vessels, and a smile that never not once reached his eyes. Julissa had known Gregory for 4 years. She had studied his laugh, memorized the rhythm of his speech, learned which subjects made him expand with pride and which made him narrow with irritation. She had done everything a promised mate was supposed to do. She had prepared herself. She had even convinced herself, somewhere in the long, quiet nights, that what she felt for him was close enough to love that the difference didn't matter. And then 3 nights ago, everything she had built inside herself cracked open. It had been past midnight when she went to the stables. She hadn't been able to sleep again, and the restlessness in her chest had driven her outside, the way it sometimes did when the walls of the Hendricks Manor felt too close. She liked the stables at night, the warmth of the animals, the smell of hay and leather, the soft sounds that filled the silence without demanding anything from her. She had pushed open the stable door and stepped inside. And frozen, Gregory stood in the amber light of a single lantern, his back to the door, his broad shoulders relaxed in a way Julissa had never seen them. He was always composed around her, always measured, always performing the role of the powerful, controlled heir. But here, in the dim warmth of the stable, he was laughing, low and easy, the sound rolling out of him like he had forgotten the whole world existed outside this moment. His hands were at someone's waist. Julissa's gaze traveled slowly, the way it does when the mind is trying to protect the heart by slowing everything down from his hands, up the curve of the person's back, to the fall of dark hair she recognized instantly. Kiana Cantrell, her cousin, her blood, the girl who had sat beside her at pack gatherings since they were children, the girl who had helped her pick out the fabric for the wedding dress, the girl who had hugged her 3 days ago and whispered, "You deserve every happiness." Gregory's mouth was at Kiana's neck, and Kiana was laughing that particular soft, private laugh that meant comfort. That meant, "I am exactly where I want to be." Julissa stood in the doorway for a breath. 2, 3, neither of them noticed her. She backed out slowly, pulled the stable door closed without a sound, stood in the cold night air with her arms wrapped around herself, and her heart doing something strange and quiet in her chest. Not breaking, not yet, but bending. Bending in the way that old wood bends before it finally splits. She walked back to the manor. She did not cry. She sat in her room and looked at the wedding dress and thought, with a strange calm clarity, I already knew. Some part of me always knew. But knowing and seeing were two entirely different wounds. She had spent the next 2 days doing what she always did. Surviving. She had smiled at breakfast. She had stood patiently through the final dress fitting. She had accepted Gregory's arm at the pre-wedding gathering and let him guide her through rooms full of congratulating nobles and nodding elders. And she had smiled, smiled, smiled. And in the quiet hours she could find alone, she had visited old Mabel Doolin. Mabel lived at the far edge of the village, in a house that smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. She was ancient in the way that certain women become ancient, not fragile, but dense, layered, like the rings inside a tree. She knew things about plants and roots, and the old ways that most of the pack had forgotten or chosen to ignore. Julissa had stood in Mabel's kitchen and said, very quietly, I need something that masks scent, strong enough to fool wolf trackers. Mabel had not asked why. She had simply turned to her shelves, selected 3 small dark glass bottles, and pressed them into Julissa's hands. 3 drops on your wrists and the base of your throat, she had said. Lasts 6 hours. After that, you are on your own. Julissa had nodded. She had paid. She had left. She had told herself she was only preparing, only being careful, only keeping a door open in case her nerve broke on the day. She had not let herself think too clearly about what it meant that she was preparing an escape before her own wedding. Now the day was here, and the dress was waiting, and her mother's footsteps had stopped outside her door. A knock. Soft, almost apologetic. Come in. Miranda Hendricks entered the room in a rush of perfume and quiet urgency, her eyes bright with the kind of nervous energy that lives in the body when feelings are too large and complicated to say out loud. She was beautiful, Julissa's mother. She had been beautiful all her life, and it had cost her things she never talked about. You need to start getting ready, Miranda said, moving immediately to the dress, running her hands over the silk with the careful reverence of someone handling something precious. The ceremony begins in 4 hours. The hair girls are already downstairs. Julissa looked at her mother's hands on the dress. Mama, she said. Just that. Just her name. Miranda paused, turned. Her expression shifted a flicker of something complicated, something almost like guilt, before the bright, purposeful mask slid back into place. Today is going to be wonderful, she said firmly. Gregory is a good match, a strong match. You will want for nothing. Julissa looked at her mother for a long moment. She thought about saying it, about telling her what she had seen in the stable, what she had heard in Kiana's laugh, what she knew now about the man waiting for her at the altar. She thought about the debt notices her father kept in the locked drawer of his study. She thought about her younger brother Reginald's medical treatments. She thought about the cold in the manor last winter when they hadn't been able to afford enough wood. She thought about all the things this marriage was supposed to fix. And she said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would change anything. Not yet. She stood up. She let her mother guide her to the chair in front of the mirror, and she looked at her own face, the dark, steady eyes, the set of her jaw, the stillness she wore like armor, and made a quiet, private promise to herself. Whatever happens today, you will not be broken by it. The ceremonial hall of the Lambert estate was magnificent in the way that displays of power always are overwhelming in scale, immaculate in detail, designed to make every person standing inside it feel the weight of what was happening and the importance of the family presiding over it. Stone pillars rose to vaulted ceilings. Tall candelabras burned with white flame. The air was thick with ceremonial incense, the kind burned at pack bonding rituals for generations, heavy and sweet and slightly suffocating, the smell of obligation dressed up as tradition. 200 guests filled the carved wooden pews on either side of the central aisle. Nobles, elders, pack council members, business allies of Elder Conrad Lambert, who sat in the front row looking satisfied in the precise, proprietary way of a man watching an investment mature. Julissa walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Bruce Hendricks walked with the rigid dignity of a man who needed everyone in this room to believe he was not desperate. His jaw was set. His shoulders were square. His hand over Julisa's, resting on his forearm, pressed down with just enough weight to be a warning. Steady. Stay steady. Do not embarrass us. Julissa walked. The dress was heavy. The corset beneath it pressed against her ribs with every breath, and each breath felt slightly shorter than the one before, a slow tightening that had nothing to do with the fabric, and everything to do with what was waiting at the end of this aisle. Gregory Lambert stood at the altar. He was handsome. She had never been able to take that from him. Tall and broad-shouldered, dark-haired, dressed in formal, ceremonial black that fit him like it had been poured on. He stood with his hands clasped loosely in front of him, his chin slightly lifted. His expression, carrying that faint, permanent smirk, the expression of a man who had never once in his life been told that something he wanted was unavailable to him. He watched her walk toward him, and he smiled. Not the warm, private smile of a man seeing the woman he loved approaching him. Not the awed, reverent smile of someone who understood what was being given to them. The smile of a man who had already won. The smile of a man who knew she knew, and didn't care. Julissa's steps did not slow. Her face remained composed, but deep inside her chest, something that had been bending for 3 days finally, quietly, went still. The elder officiating, a gray-bearded man named Hayden Finch, who had presided over pack ceremonies for 40 years, raised his hands and began the ritual words. The hall fell into sacred silence. Julissa stood beside Gregory and looked at his profile and let the words wash over her. She heard them distantly, like sounds coming through deep water. The ancient promises, the binding oaths, the language of permanence and belonging that her pack had used for centuries to seal 2 lives together. Gregory turned to face her as the bonding portion of the ceremony approached, and in the exact moment that Elder Finch spoke the words that would begin the formal vow exchange, Gregory reached for her hand, unhurried, proprietary, inevitable, and he smiled again. That smile. "You are mine," it said. And we both know it. Julissa's mind did something precise and quiet in that instant. It showed her Kiana's back in the stable lantern light, Gregory's hands at her waist, the ease of his laugh, the sound of her cousin's voice saying, "You deserve every happiness," while knowing what she had been doing with the man Julissa was about to bond herself to forever. His fingers closed around hers, and Julissa moved. Her palm connected with Gregory's face with a sound that split the sacred silence like a stone through glass. The hall gasped a single collective sound, 200 voices inhaling at once. Gregory's head snapped to the side. He stumbled back a half step, his hand flying to his cheek, his eyes going wide with the pure animal shock of someone who has never once been struck in their life. Julissa did not stop. She grabbed the wedding bouquet from the hands of the startled attendant beside her and swung it against Gregory's chest with both arms, white roses and silver ribbon exploding across the front of his formal jacket, petals scattering across the ceremonial floor like snow. "Julissa," her father's voice, somewhere behind her. Low, horrified, she did not hear it. She heard nothing but the roar of 3 days of silence, finally finding its exit. Gregory recovered. His shock curdled into fury, and he straightened to his full height and reached for her arm with a grip that meant, "You will stop this now." She ripped her arm free, bent down, seized the heel of her left wedding shoe, the elegant, pointed heel that had cost her family more than they should have spent on something that would be worn once. She drove it into Gregory's shoulder. He cried out. The hall erupted. Elders were on their feet. Noble guests were standing, pressing forward, crying out in outrage and shock. Gregory's family had risen from the front pew like a wall of anger. Elder Conrad Lambert's face had gone the color of old blood. Gregory's eyes found hers furious, humiliated, disbelieving, and in them, she finally saw the truth that his smile had always been hiding. Not love, never love, only possession, only ownership. She looked at him for exactly 1 second, long enough for him to understand. She was not afraid. "You will not mark me," she said, her voice shaking not with fear but with the white-hot, clarifying energy of a woman who has finally stopped swallowing the thing trying to come out. "Not after you put your hands on her." The silence that followed those words lasted perhaps 2 full heartbeats. Then Gregory's expression shifted from fury into something colder, more dangerous, and he took a step toward her. Julissa turned and ran. The wedding dress slowed her down immediately. The heavy silk, the layers of underskirt, the long train they were built for standing still, for elegant movement through prepared spaces, not for flight. She gathered the skirts in both arms as she ran, bunching them above her knees, bare feet hitting cold stone as she burst through the ceremonial hall doors and into the open air. Behind her, she heard the hall descend into chaos, raised voices, the deep authoritative bark of Elder Conrad Lambert demanding order, Gregory's voice sharp, controlled now, the shock burning off and the calculation replacing it. Find her. 2 words, quiet. But she heard them even over the distance. Her blood went cold. Gregory's pack, the Lambert pack, were trackers. It was their particular gift, the ability that had made them formidable allies and terrifying enemies for 3 generations. They could follow a scent trail across 2 days of rain. They could find a target in a city of 10,000 by the thread of a smell left on a doorframe. And Julissa was standing in open air in her own perfume and panic sweat, leaving a trail behind her as clear as written directions. She ran, through the formal gardens, through the iron gate at the far end, down the stone path that curved toward the road. Her feet found the packed earth of the forest road, and she kept running, the trees closing around her, the light changing from gray morning to the filtered green dark of old forest. Her lungs burned. The corset still gripped her ribs. The dress, even gathered, dragged against her legs. She reached into the small hidden pocket she had made, the seamstress add to the underskirt, the one she had told her mother was for a handkerchief, and her fingers closed around the 3 small glass bottles. She twisted the cap on the first bottle with shaking hands. The smell hit her immediately deep and green and strange, like rain on stone and something ancient underneath. Nothing like any perfume she had ever worn. She tipped 3 drops onto her left wrist, rubbed it against her right, pressed both wrists to the base of her throat the way Mabel had told her. She kept moving. The road curved and narrowed, the trees pressing close on both sides. The sounds of the Lambert estate faded behind her, and for a few long, terrifying minutes, she heard nothing except her own breath and her own footsteps, and the occasional crack of something small moving in the undergrowth. Then, in the distance ahead of her, a shape, a carriage, black, still, sitting in the middle of the road in the way that things only sit when they have stopped for reasons the road was not informed of. The curtains were drawn across the windows. No coachman on the box. No horses moving. Just the carriage, enormous and dark and silent, like something that had decided this particular stretch of road was where it would wait. Julissa slowed. She looked back over her shoulder. Nothing visible yet. But the Lambert trackers moved fast once they had their direction, and she had perhaps minutes before. She did not finish the thought. She ran to the carriage, seized the door handle, threw it open, and hurled herself inside. She hit the carriage floor with both knees and both palms, gasping, the dress billowing around her in a cloud of ivory silk and scattered rose petals. The door swung shut behind her with a solid, heavy sound. She pressed herself against the side of the carriage, breathing in ragged pulls, and let her eyes adjust to the dimness. The interior was dark. Leather seats, the smell of something warm and deep wood smoke, clean pine, the faint trace of something metallic, like cold morning air, the kind of smell that meant predator. Julissa's breathing began to slow, and then she noticed what she had not seen in her panicked dive through the door. The boots, on the seat across from her. Long legs stretched out, crossed at the ankle. Black leather boots, tall, fitted, with silver trim at the upper edge. Not decorative silver, not ornamental, but functional. The kind of silver trim that served as rank identification. High rank, the very highest. Julissa's eyes traveled upward slowly. Dark trousers. A long coat, black, with the collar turned up. Broad shoulders relaxed against the carriage seat, with the absolute unhurried ease of someone who had been waiting here for precisely as long as they chose to wait, and would continue to do so for exactly as long as suited them. And above all of that, a face. Angular, dark-eyed, a jaw that could have been cut from the stone of the mountain estates in the north, and an expression of such perfect, controlled stillness that for one disorienting moment, Julissa thought she was looking at something carved rather than something alive, until his eyes moved to hers, black eyes, deep-set, carrying in them the particular quality of someone who sees everything and reveals nothing. Julissa Hendricks knew that face. The entire pack knew that face. Every soul in the Northern Territories, from the oldest elder to the youngest pup, knew that face. Jeremy Mackenzie, the Alpha King. The silence inside the carriage stretched between them like a held breath. Outside, somewhere in the distance, she heard the sound of running boots on packed earth, multiple sets, moving fast and deliberate. The Lambert trackers. Julissa could not breathe, could not move, could not speak. Jeremy Mackenzie looked at her, all of her. The destroyed wedding dress, the bare feet, the scattered rose petals, the wild eyes, and for one long, exquisite moment, he said absolutely nothing. Then, very quietly, "Interesting morning." Julissa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Outside the carriage, the footsteps were growing louder. She could hear voices now too, maybe 3 men moving through the undergrowth at the side of the road. The efficient, purposeful sounds of trained trackers spreading out in a search pattern. Gregory's men. Jeremy had not moved. He sat exactly as he had been, relaxed, legs extended, dark eyes on her face with the quality of a man who was under no particular impression that this situation required urgency from him. "They are Lambert trackers," Julissa managed, her voice low and tight. "They will check this carriage." "I imagine so," Jeremy said. She stared at him. "You have to." She stopped, swallowed. The full reality of who she was talking to crashed back over her like cold water. She was in the carriage of the Alpha King, in a destroyed wedding dress, after publicly assaulting an elder's son, begging for help. She was going to be sick. "I have to what?" Jeremy asked. There was nothing sharp in the question, no mockery, just the straightforward, patient inquiry of a man waiting for a sentence to be completed. "Help me," she said. The words came out smaller than she intended. She hated that. She had spent her entire adult life making sure her voice never came out small. Something moved across Jeremy's expression too quick and too well controlled for her to name it. His eyes dropped briefly to her wrists, where the scent-masking oil had darkened the skin slightly, then back to her face. He said nothing for one more long beat. Then he straightened from his reclined position, unhurried, and shrugged the heavy coat from his shoulders. "Come here," he said quietly. Julissa did not move immediately. Every instinct she had, the careful, self-protective instincts she had spent years developing, said, "You do not know what this costs. You do not know what he will want in exchange." The footsteps outside were close now, very close. She moved. She crossed the small space between the seats, and Jeremy pulled her against his side and settled the coat over both of them in one smooth, practiced motion, like he had done this before, or like it was simply obvious, or like the two things were the same. The coat was heavy, warm. It smelled of him, that cold pine, wood smoke smell, layered with something else underneath. Something her wolf senses registered as significant and immediately began trying to name. She could not name it. Not then. Her entire focus was on the carriage door and the sounds outside. Jeremy's hand came to rest at her back. Flat, steady. Not gripping, not restraining, just present. A weight that said, "I have you," without saying anything at all. A knock on the carriage door. 3 beats. Firm. Jeremy reached across her and opened the panel without disturbing her position against him, with the unhurried calm of a man answering his own front door. One of the trackers, young, sharp-eyed, wearing Lambert colors, leaned in. His nostrils flared instinctively as he scanned the interior. The scent-masking oil would handle Julissa's trail, but the tracker's gaze still moved across the shadow beneath the coat, The disarranged fabric, the visible edge of ivory silk. His eyes found Jeremy's. A pause. A reckoning. The man's expression flickered through several things in quick succession: recognition, caution, the specific recalibration that happened when someone mid-action suddenly registered exactly whose eyes they were meeting. "Your Majesty," the title came out carefully. "Apologies for the interruption. We are searching for a woman. Young, dark hair, wedding dress." Jeremy held the tracker's gaze with the unhurried patience of someone who had all day and knew it. "I am alone," he said. "Not I haven't seen anyone. Not I don't know what you're talking about. Just that. I am alone." The tracker hesitated. His instincts were good. Julissa could feel it in the quality of his silence, the way his eyes wanted to drop to the code again. But those instincts were up against 4 centuries of Mackenzie authority, and they lost. "Of course, Your Majesty. Forgive the intrusion." The panel closed. Julissa did not move. She felt the tracker's footsteps through the carriage floor once, twice, retreating, and then the other footsteps joining them, moving away, moving further, fading into the distance of the forest road. She waited until she could not hear them at all. Then she let out the breath she had been holding for what felt like a very long time. Jeremy's hand at her back remained exactly where it was. She should have moved. She knew she should have moved, extracted herself immediately, put space between them, reassembled whatever was left of her dignity. She was pressed against the side of the Alpha King in a wrecked wedding dress with rose petals in her hair and scent-blocking oil on her wrists. And none of this was recoverable by any reasonable social standard. She did not move. "They will circle back," she said. Her voice was steadier now. Something about the solidity of him, the absolute unchanging quality of his presence, had settled something in her chest that had been shaking since the altar. "They will," Jeremy agreed. "I need to keep moving." "You do," he said. "And you will. But not on foot in a wedding dress." She pulled back enough to look at him. The coat slid slightly off one shoulder. She caught it. "What are you suggesting?" Jeremy looked at her with those dark, measuring eyes. There was something in them she could not quite reach a depth that had more in it than she was seeing on the surface. Like a body of water that presented a calm face upward while something entirely different moved below. "I am suggesting," he said, "that you sit still and let the carriage take you somewhere they cannot follow." Julissa looked at him for a long moment. And where would that be? He reached forward and rapped twice on the wall behind the driver's seat. The carriage began to move. Julissa sat with her back against the far side of the carriage and watched the forest slide past through the gap in the curtains and tried to think clearly. This was difficult. Clarity required a stable foundation, and every foundation she had was currently in ruins. Her engagement, her family's plan, her social standing, the neat, organized shape of the life she had been building brick by careful brick since she was old enough to understand what was expected of her. All of it was rubble now, left behind on a ceremonial hall floor covered in rose petals and shattered dignity. But not her dignity. She needed to be precise about that. Gregory's dignity, perhaps. Elder Conrad Lambert's dignity, certainly. But not hers. She had not been broken on that altar. She had broken something else. She was almost surprised to notice she did not feel afraid of what she had done. She felt lighter than she had in years. A small, disorienting observation to make while sitting across from the Alpha King in a moving carriage with no clear destination and several very angry Lambert trackers somewhere behind her. She looked at Jeremy. He had settled back into his original position, coat retrieved, returned to his shoulders, legs extended, the very picture of a man on a completely ordinary journey who had simply had a slightly unusual occurrence along the way. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the curtained window on his side with the distant, even gaze of someone thinking about something entirely different. Something about that prickled her. She knew his face. Of course she did. Portraits of the Alpha King hung in every pack hall, every elder's meeting room, every official building in the Northern Territories. But there was a difference between knowing a face from portraits and sitting 3 feet away from the person wearing it. The portraits did not capture the stillness of him. They captured the severity, the angular jaw, the dark coloring, the set of the shoulders that communicated authority without requiring speech. But they missed the stillness, the quality of complete, unhurried settledness that emanated from him like heat from stone. She had met him once before. Briefly, the memory surfaced now, unwanted and vivid. 6 months ago, at a diplomatic gathering hosted by Elder Hayden Finch on behalf of the Northern Council. Julissa had attended as her father's companion, one of dozens of pack members present to observe and network in the careful, exhausting way of political events. Jeremy Mackenzie had arrived with a small retinue and moved through the room the way natural forces moved, without apparent effort, without the need for space to be cleared, because space simply rearranged itself around him. Julissa had been standing at the edge of the main hall, with a glass of something she wasn't drinking, watching the room with the particular half-attention she used at events like these, when she became aware that someone had stopped beside her. She turned, and found the Alpha King standing close enough that she could have reached out and touched his coat, looking not at the room as she had been, but at her. She had not flustered. She did not flutter easily. But she had felt something shift in the air between them that she had no name for. A pressure change, like the moment before weather arrives. "You look," he had said, without preamble or greeting, like a woman choosing duty over happiness. It was the most presumptuous thing anyone had ever said to her. She did not think. She did not calculate. She did not do any of the careful, measured things she usually did. She slapped him. Her palm connected with his cheek, not as hard as she had hit Gregory today, but hard enough to be absolutely unambiguous about her feelings on unsolicited observations about her inner life from men she had not been introduced to. The hall around them went very still. Jeremy had turned his face back toward her slowly. There was no anger in it, no outrage, no wounded pride, none of the things that should have been there from any man in any position, let alone the Alpha King who had just been publicly struck by a nobody from a struggling family. He had looked at her with those dark, deep eyes and smiled a slow, private smile, the first genuine expression she had seen on his face, and said, so quietly that only she could hear it, "Good, you have fire." Then he had walked away, and Julissa had stood in the rearranged silence of the room around her, trying to understand what exactly had just happened. She had been escorted home by her father immediately afterward. The incident had been, through the mercy of political discretion and the particular grace of the fact that no one wanted to be the person who made an official complaint about the Alpha King's behavior, smoothed over and largely unmentioned. But she had not forgotten it. And sitting in this carriage now, she understood, with a settling certainty, that he had not forgotten it either. "You knew it was me," she said. Jeremy's gaze moved from the curtained window to her face without any indication of surprise at either the question or the timing. "When I got in," she said, "you recognized me immediately." A pause. "Yes," he said. "And you helped me anyway." "Yes." She studied him. "Why?" Jeremy looked at her for a long moment, the particular measuring look that she was beginning to recognize as his default mode of examining the world, unhurried and complete. "The question," he said, "is not why I helped you. The question is what you are going to do next." She wanted to push back on the deflection. She noted it, filed it, and set it aside for now. "I don't know yet," she said. And because he seemed to be the kind of person who responded better to honesty than to performance, "I planned the escape. I didn't plan what comes after." Something in his expression shifted. Not much. The smallest softening at the corner of that controlled mouth. "That is more honest than most people would be in your position," he said. "I don't see the point of pretending I have a strategy when I don't." "No," he said. "I imagine you don't." He looked at the curtained window again. Outside, the forest had deepened around them, the road climbing slightly, the light changing quality. "There is a lodge, 2 hours north. My retinue uses it when traveling this route. It is off the main roads, secure." Julissa looked at her hands in her lap. The knuckles were slightly bruised. She had not noticed that until now. "And in exchange for this?" she asked. Jeremy turned back to her. He looked almost amused. "I'm not Gregory Lambert, Miss Hendricks," he said. "I don't run accounts." She met his eyes, held them. "Good," she said quietly. "Neither do I." The carriage rolled on through the forest, carrying them north, while behind them, the Lambert trackers circled in the empty road and found nothing at all. The lodge appeared through the trees like something from a story. Stone walls the color of charcoal, 2 stories high, set against the side of a slope, with a river running silver and fast at its base. Smoke from the chimneys, warm light in the lower windows, a stable to one side, a guard post barely visible at the tree line, understated, careful, designed not to announce itself. Julissa stepped down from the carriage and immediately felt the cold. The altitude here was higher than she had realized during the journey, and the air bit at her bare arms, her bare feet finding the cold stone of the path with a sharp shock that she welcomed. Actually, it was clarifying. A man emerged from the lodge door before the carriage had fully stopped. Mid-40s, square-built, with the weathered competence of someone who had spent their life in service to people who moved through dangerous landscapes. He looked at Jeremy, then at Julissa, then at the wedding dress, and visibly reorganized his entire expression into neutral professionalism. "Blaze," Jeremy said. "She needs shoes, a room, and food." "Yes, sir." Blaze disappeared back through the door without another word. Julissa appreciated that. She had no energy left for being stared at. Inside, the lodge was warm and spare, and unpretentious in the way that spaces belonging to truly powerful people sometimes are nothing to prove, nothing to demonstrate, just functional comfort, and the kind of quality that didn't need to announce itself. Stone floors with heavy rugs, a fireplace in the main room large enough to stand in, dark wooden furniture, books, maps. Julissa stood in the center of the main room and felt the warmth begin to work on her shivering, and allowed herself, for just a moment, to exist without thinking about what came next. A woman appeared from the back of the lodge, young, practical-looking, with the quick eyes of someone who did their job well without being told twice. She introduced herself as Kimura and guided Julissa up the stairs to a room with a wide bed and a fireplace, and a window overlooking the river, and told her that clothes and hot water and food would be brought. Julissa sat on the edge of the bed in the too large room and looked at the fire. She thought about her parents. By now, the news would have reached the Hendricks house, not just that Julissa had fled, but the details of how. The altar scene, the witnesses, the things she had said. Her mother would be in bed with something pressed to her forehead. Her father would be in his study, very still, thinking about what this cost them. She thought about Kiana. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs and breathed. Not now. Later she could be angry about Kiana. Later she could grieve it properly, the betrayal of blood, the particular cruelty of it, the years of Kazine closeness that had apparently been something other than what she believed. Later. Right now she needed food and sleep, and the kind of stillness that let a person think. The food came first: bread, roasted meat, something warm in a heavy clay bowl that she didn't identify but ate without stopping until the bowl was empty. Kimura took the wedding dress without comment, and returned with clothes that were plain and well-made, and fit her reasonably well dark trousers, a heavy knit top, soft boots lined with something warm. Julissa stood at the window in the new clothes and watched the river below and felt, for the first time in 3 days, like herself. Not the version of herself that had been packaged and presented and prepared for Gregory Lambert's future. The original version. The one that had existed before all the careful management. A knock at the door. She turned. Yes. The door opened. Jeremy Mackenzie stood in the frame, his coat gone now, dressed simply in dark clothes that fit him with the unconscious precision of a man who had never needed to think about how he looked. He held 2 cups. "Hot chocolate," he said. "Blaze makes it badly, but it is hot." Julissa looked at him for a moment. Then she moved away from the window and sat in one of the chairs by the fire. And he crossed the room and set a cup on the small table beside her, and sat in the chair across. Between them, the fire moved, and the river ran outside the window, and the silence was unexpectedly comfortable. Not the loaded silence of two people avoiding something, but the simple quiet of two people who had used a great deal of words today already and were not required to use more. Julissa wrapped her hands around the cup. The warmth moved through her palms. "You are not going to ask me what I am going to do," she said. It was not quite a question. "You will figure it out," Jeremy said. "People who prepare scent masking oil 2 days before their wedding generally do." She looked at him sharply. His expression was perfectly even, but there was something in it, a watchful quality, a careful attention that made her feel suddenly, inexplicably, that she was being seen more clearly than she was accustomed to. "How do you know about the oil?" "I smelled it in the carriage," he said simply. "Old Mabel Doolin's recipe. She has been making it for 60 years. Julissa sat with that. "You know Mabel Doolin." "I know most things in my territory." He looked at the fire. "I also know she does not give that particular preparation to people who simply want to change perfumes." Silence. "You had decided before the wedding," he said. Not an accusation, a simple observation. "I had decided," Julissa said, "that I needed to be able to decide." She looked at the fire. "I didn't know I would actually use it until I was standing at the altar, and he reached for my hand." Jeremy said nothing. He was a person, she was discovering, who understood the value of not filling silence. "He was with my cousin," she said. 3 nights before. I saw them in the stables." She paused. "She told me I deserved every happiness." Something moved in Jeremy's jaw. Brief, controlled. "And your family?" he asked. "They needed the match." She turned the cup in her hands. "The debt. My brother's treatments. The estate. Gregory Lambert was the solution to all of it. And now? Now I have to find another solution." She looked at him steadily. "I always do." Jeremy looked at her across the firelit space between them. She could not tell what he was thinking. She had met many powerful men in her life, her father, Elder Finch, Gregory himself, and she had learned to read most of them, to find the current beneath the surface, the want beneath the performance. Jeremy Mackenzie had no current she could find. Or rather, the current was there. She could feel it, but it ran too deep to trace. "Stay here tonight," he said. "In the morning we will assess your options." "We?" she asked. "You are in my carriage," he said. "That makes this, for the moment, somewhat my problem." She considered pushing back on that. She decided for once to let someone else carry part of the weight. "All right," she said. She looked at the fire. He looked at the fire. Outside the river ran fast and cold through the dark. "I slapped you," she said eventually, not entirely sure why she was bringing it up. "You did," he agreed. "At the Finch gathering, 6 months ago. I remember." She looked at him sidelong. "You said I had fire." Jeremy met her gaze. In the firelight, his eyes were not black, but a very deep brown, the color of water under old trees, and something in them was different from the quality she had seen in the carriage. Something more present, more exposed. "You did," he said simply. "You do." The moment stretched. Julissa looked away first, back to the fire. Her heart was doing something she did not particularly want to examine too closely. "Good night, Your Majesty," she said. A pause. Then, quietly, "Jeremy." She glanced at him. "My name," he said, "is Jeremy." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she nodded. Once. He rose. He crossed to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame, his back to her. "You made the right choice today," he said. "Whatever it costs." He left. Julissa sat alone by the fire with the bad hot chocolate cooling in her hands, and the river running outside and the fire moving in the dark, and she thought about the expression in his eyes in the moment before she looked away, and she pressed her lips together and firmly, deliberately, did not think about what it had looked like. She was not ready for that thought yet. She needed several more quiet hours before she was ready for that thought. She slept deeply, and without dreams for the first time in 3 days. In the morning, she came downstairs to find Jeremy already at the table with a map and 2 plates of food. and Blaze in the corner looking carefully in the opposite direction, and the particular charged quality of a morning that had already organized itself around a decision. Jeremy looked up when she entered. "Your father sent a messenger," he said. "He arrived an hour ago." Julisa's stomach tightened. What did the message say? That your family is requesting your return. That Elder Lambert is putting pressure on your father to either produce you for a rescheduled ceremony or formally dissolve the agreement. And he paused. That Gregory is threatening legal action against your family if no resolution is reached within the week. She sat down. She picked up the bread from her plate because she needed something to do with her hands. "Gregory is threatening my family," she said flatly. "He is." She looked at the map on the table. The Northern Territories spread across it in careful ink. Forests, roads, pack boundaries, mountains. The Hendricks estate was marked in the south, the Lambert holdings in the center. The Mackenzie Mountain Territories in the north, vast and deep, and marked with that particular ink weight that said here, "The land belongs to something older. He will ruin them," she said. "If I don't go back, he will use every legal avenue he has until there is nothing left." "Probably," Jeremy said. He did not soften it. She respected that. She sat with the bread in her hand and thought. Then, without fully planning to, she said, "What if there was a reason I couldn't go back to Gregory, that Gregory's lawyers couldn't challenge?" Jeremy was quiet. "What if," she said carefully, "there was a reason I was unavailable to him that was socially impregnable?" A long pause. "Go on," Jeremy said. She looked at him across the table. The morning light came through the window behind him and made his outline sharp. Her mind was moving fast now, the way it moved when the careful, analytical part of her finally got enough quiet to operate. "What if it became known," she said, "that I was here because the Alpha King had expressed an interest in courting me?" The silence that followed this was the loudest silence she had ever sat in. Jeremy looked at her. His expression had not changed, precisely, but there was something new in it, an alertness, a quality of close attention. "That would be a lie," he said. "It would be a strategic fiction," she corrected. "One that protects my family from Gregory's retaliation and buys time for me to find a real solution. And when the fiction collapses, I find a real solution before it collapses." She held his gaze. "I am very good at finding solutions." Jeremy looked at her for a long moment. Outside, a bird called twice. The fire settled in the grate. He said, very quietly, "What if it was not entirely a fiction?" Julissa went still. He looked at her steadily, with those deep, measured eyes. Not with the predatory confidence of Gregory's smirk. Not with the performance of attraction. Just with honesty, the plain, direct honesty of someone who had decided, for whatever reason, to stop leaving something unspoken. She did not know what to do with that. She filed it, carefully, in a place she could examine later. "My father arrives tomorrow," she said. "I need something to tell him." Jeremy looked at the map, then back at her. "Tell him," he said, "that the Alpha King is keeping you in his protection, and that he will confirm this personally." Her breath caught. "You would." "I will receive your father," Jeremy said, "and I will tell him what he needs to hear to keep Gregory Lambert's lawyers quiet." She stared at him. "Why?" He met her eyes, and in them she saw, for just a moment, past the controlled surface, to something older and more certain, something that had been there, she somehow understood, for longer than today. "Because," he said, "some things are worth protecting." He picked up his cup, looked at the map, and Julissa sat across from him in the morning light, with her untouched bread in her hand, and the sudden, disorienting sensation that something had shifted beneath her, not the ground, but something deeper, something foundational. She did not yet have words for it, but she had the feeling. Bruce Hendricks arrived the following afternoon. He was alone, which told Julissa everything she needed to know about how carefully he was managing this. No public witnesses, no pack escorts, just a father coming quietly to retrieve what had been lost. His face, when Blaze showed him into the main room where Julissa and Jeremy were seated, went through a complicated sequence of expressions: relief, anger, calculation, and finally a careful blankness as his eyes moved to the man sitting across from his daughter. The Alpha King stood. Bruce Hendricks performed a deep bow. His hands were not entirely steady. "Your Majesty," he said, "I apologize for whatever inconvenience my daughter has caused." "She has caused none," Jeremy said. His voice was pleasant and absolutely final. "She has been my guest. She remains my guest, for as long as she chooses." Bruce blinked. His gaze moved to Julissa. She looked at him steadily. She had spent the previous night thinking carefully about this moment, about what to say and how to say it, and she had decided on honesty with a thin, strategic frame around it. "Papa," she said, "I am not going back to Gregory Lambert." Bruce's jaw tightened. "Julissa, the debt alone will be managed," she said. "I am working on a solution." "A solution?" He looked at Jeremy, back at her. She watched the calculation happen in real time behind his eyes, the same calculation he had been running for 4 years, the one where Julissa's future was an asset to be deployed. Jeremy spoke then, in the measured tone of someone who had decided exactly how much to say. "I have expressed an interest in your daughter, Mr. Hendricks," he said. "Formally, that interest supersedes any prior arrangement. Elder Lambert is welcome to bring whatever legal arguments he wishes to the council. I will be present to respond to them." The room was very still. Bruce Hendricks looked at the Alpha King for a long, long moment. The kind of moment that contained an entire future being rerouted. Then he sat down heavily in the nearest chair, as though his legs had made a decision without consulting him, and pressed his hand over his eyes. "Formally," he said. The word came out strange, not quite disbelief, not quite hope, something suspended between them. "Formally," Jeremy confirmed. Julissa watched her father. She felt the sharp dual edges of guilt and relief guilt for the complexity this created. Relief that it was working. And under both of those, something that was harder to name. Something about what it meant that Jeremy had said formally without hesitation, without performance, in the voice of a man stating a fact. Her father left 2 hours later, looking like a man who had arrived to collect a debt, and found instead that the debt had been restructured by someone with considerably more leverage than anyone he knew. That night, Julissa sat on the stone wall at the back of the lodge and watched the river below, and allowed herself to think about Jeremy Mackenzie with full attention for the first time. He moved through the world with no excess. Every word carried its weight. Every action was precise. There was no performance in him, no need to be seen, no performance of authority for its own sake. He simply was present and certain, and completely unbothered by anyone else's expectations. She had met men of power all her life. She had never met anyone like this. He appeared beside her on the wall after a while, said nothing, looked at the river. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," he agreed, "but you did." "Yes." She looked at him in the dark. The moonlight found the sharp line of his jaw, the quiet steadiness of his hands resting on the stone. "Are you going to keep not telling me the real reason?" she asked. He turned his head and looked at her. In the dark, his eyes were very deep. "I am going to tell you," he said, "when you are ready to hear it." "I'm ready." "You are not," he said gently, not dismissively, just with the certainty of someone who could see clearly. "You have been betrayed in multiple directions inside 1 week. You need time to trust your own instincts before you trust anyone else's." She wanted to argue. She found she couldn't. Because he was right. And she knew he was right. And the fact that he had seen it without being told, and responded to it with patience rather than pressure, was doing something quite significant to her carefully maintained equilibrium. "All right," she said quietly. They sat together on the stone wall with the river below and the dark above, and the night full of sound water, wind, the distant call of something in the forest, and said nothing more. It was the most comfortable silence Julissa had ever sat in. 3 days passed. The lodge settled into a rhythm that surprised her, one built not on awkward formality or careful distance, but on something closer to ease. Jeremy was away in the mornings, working with the small retinue that had joined them from the mountain estates, dealing with the constant administrative demands of governing a territory as large as his. He worked the way he did everything else, quietly, efficiently, without drama. In the afternoons, they were often in the same spaces. He showed her the maps not for any practical reason, it seemed, just because she had expressed interest, and he responded to genuine interest as naturally as light found water. He knew the territory the way some people know music, not by memorized fact but by feel. She told him things she had not said aloud before, about her brother's illness, about the years of management, of making herself into something useful, about the creeping exhaustion of being the family's solution. He listened the way certain people listen, without preparing his response while she was still speaking, without the small, impatient shifts that meant, yes, but let me tell you my equivalent experience. Just present. In the evenings, there was the fire, the charged quiet, the slow accumulation of proximity that neither of them addressed directly. On the fourth evening, Kimura was setting the table for dinner and knocked a lamp from its shelf, catching it at the last moment with a sound like a struck bell. The sudden sound made Julissa flinch harder than she expected, her whole body tensing with the reflex of the still recent shock of the altar scene. Jeremy's hand found her arm, not grasping, just there, warm through the fabric of her sleeve, the briefest steadying, then gone, but she felt it for a long time after. That night she lay in the wide bed looking at the fire shadows on the ceiling and thought about the moment at the Finch gathering his face when she hit him. The slow smile, the words, "Good, you have fire." She thought about the carriage, his hand at her back, the way he had said, "I am alone," with absolute conviction while she was pressed against his chest. She thought about the table this morning, the way he had looked up when she came into the room, not with the careful interest of a man managing an impression, but with the immediate, unguarded quality of someone whose face does the thing it does before the person has decided to let it. She thought about what he had said. What if it was not entirely a fiction? She pressed her hands over her face. "Stop," she told herself. "You are not ready for this." He said so himself. She was not sure whether she was arguing with herself or agreeing. The letter from Kiana arrived on the 6th day. Kimura brought it up with Julissa's morning tea, face carefully neutral. Julissa looked at the handwriting on the outer fold. She would have known it anywhere, had known it since they were girls writing each other notes in pack school, and sat very still for a moment before opening it. The letter was short. "I know where you are. I am sorry, Julissa. But Gregory has what he needs now." She read it twice. Then she folded it precisely and set it on the table beside her cooling tea. 3 hours later, she went to find Jeremy. She found him at the far end of the grounds, talking with 2 of his men. He saw her face when she appeared at the tree line and ended the conversation with a single word. His men melted away. He crossed to her. "What happened?" he said. She handed him the letter. He read it. She watched his face, the small, controlled response that moved through it. Something that was not quite anger. Something colder than anger. "She told him where you are," he said. "She will have told him everything," Julissa said. Her voice was steady. She had had 3 hours with it. The lodge, your involvement, the courtship story, all of it. Jeremy folded the letter. His jaw was set. "We move today," he said. "Move where?" He looked at her. "North, the main estate, the mountain castle." He paused. "It is more defensible. And if Gregory decides to make this a formal challenge, it needs to be addressed from a formal seat of power. This is becoming a great deal more complicated than hiding in a carriage," Julissa said. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at the forest. The morning was clear and cold, the light sharp through the leaves. "I need to go home first," she said. "My family will be escorted by my men," Jeremy said. "Tonight, they will be safe." She turned to look at him. The precision of that response, the fact that he had already considered her family's vulnerability, had already moved toward protecting it before she finished her sentence, hit her somewhere unsteady. "You anticipated this," she said. He held her gaze. I anticipated the possibility. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "Why do you keep doing that?" she asked. "Anticipating, preparing, covering what I haven't thought to cover yet." Jeremy looked back at her steadily. The morning light was on his face, and in it, she could see the thing she had been unable to fully see in the firelight. Not just the control, not just the authority, but something else. Something that ran underneath all of it. An intensity that was entirely focused and entirely personal and directed with unwavering exactness at her. She held his gaze. She did not look away. And because some truths arrive not through careful reasoning but through the sudden removal of the resistance you have been maintaining against them, she understood something in that moment with complete clarity. He knew, whatever he was, whatever he had been doing, whatever patient, private certainty had been operating underneath every calm word and careful action since the moment she fell into his carriage, he knew something about her that she had not yet been given the language to understand. About herself. She filed it, as she had been filing things. But this one she filed close. They arrived at the Mackenzie Mountain estate as the sun dropped toward the western range. The carriage climbing the final approach road with the valley spreading away below them in the golden late light. Julissa had seen drawings of the estate. It appeared in political documents and official portraits, and the background of formal ceremony depictions. A vast stone complex set against the mountain face. Multiple wings and towers connected by high-walled passages, with the practical brutality of something built not for beauty, but for permanence. But the drawings had missed the scale, and they had missed the warmth. The courtyards inside the walls were not cold stone wastelands, but spaces with old trees and stone benches, and the kind of worn-in quality that came from centuries of people actually living there. The great hall had fire lit in both its central hearths and smelled of wood and bread, and the complex layered history of a family that had occupied a space for generations. The staff moved with the easy efficiency of people who were well managed and knew it. Julissa was given a suite in the east wing with windows looking out over the valley and a sitting room with a fire already laid. She stood at the window for a long time watching the valley floor darken below. Jeremy appeared in her doorway that evening without knocking. She had left the door open. "Your parents arrived an hour ago," he said. "My men brought them safely. They are being settled in the guest wing." She turned from the window. "And Gregory is not here, and will not come here." His voice was mild and entirely certain. "You can't promise." "I can," he said, simply, without drama. She looked at him across the room. The firelight moved. Outside, the valley was dark now, the mountains visible only as darker shapes against the sky. "Jeremy," she said. His name in her mouth felt different than most things. Solid, real. "Tell me, what is it that you're not telling me?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed the room. Not to her, to the chair beside the fire. He sat, and his elbows came forward onto his knees, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked like a person carrying something heavy. "It is not a simple thing to say," he said. "Say it plainly," she said. She crossed and sat in the other chair. "I prefer that." He looked at the fire for a long moment. "The first time I saw you," he said, "was not at the Finch gathering." She stilled. "It was 14 months ago, at a midsummer market at the southern border of my territory. You were with your brother. He had fallen and cut his hand on the market stalls, and you were tearing your own sleeve to bandage it, and telling him it was fine with the absolute conviction of someone who was clearly not sure it was fine, but had decided certainty was what was needed." He paused. "I was passing through on official business. I had a full retinue. I stopped the entire column." Julissa's breath was very quiet. "My captain asked me what we were stopping for. I didn't answer him." A pause. "Because I didn't have an answer yet." The fire moved. "I made inquiries," he said. "I learned your name, your family's situation, the arrangement with Gregory Lambert." His jaw tightened briefly. It was already contracted. "Formally, and you came from a family that needed the match, and I was..." He stopped. "I handled it poorly. The gathering," she said slowly. "I had been watching you manage that room for an hour," he said, smiling when you didn't want to, nodding at people you were not listening to. "And I said something I should have approached differently. You were right to respond the way you did." She stared at him. "You were right," he said again, and he meant it. She could hear that he meant it completely. "I came at you without warning or permission, and made an observation about your private life, and I deserved exactly what I received." "And then you smiled," she said. "Because you were extraordinary," he said. "Because you hit the Alpha King in front of 60 witnesses and stood there entirely unafraid, and I thought..." He stopped again. "What?" she asked. Her voice was barely a sound. He looked at her. All that carefully maintained distance, all that controlled stillness not gone, but transparent suddenly, like glass instead of stone. "I thought, there she is," he said, "the person I have been looking for." The fire burned. The valley was dark outside. Julissa sat in the chair and looked at this man, this person who had seen her in a market tearing her sleeve for her brother, who had stopped a full royal column and not known why, who had watched her manage a political gathering with a cracking heart and said the thing he should not have said, and taken her reaction as a revelation rather than an insult, who had hidden her in his carriage and lied to a tracker and brought her to safety and received her father and confirmed a courtship without being asked. She pressed her palms flat on her knees. "You should have told me," she said. "I know. You should have..." She stopped. She thought about Gregory's hands at Kiana's waist, about her father's face when she had tried to speak the truth at breakfast and found she couldn't, about 4 years of being someone else's solution. "I have been told things before," she said carefully, "that turned out not to be the things they appeared to be." "I know," he said. "So I need you to understand that this is not..." She pressed her lips together. "I cannot simply..." "Julissa." His voice was quiet. Her name in his voice was the way her name sounded in her own head, not the formal version, not the managed version, but the actual one. "I am not asking for anything. I am telling you the truth because you asked me to tell you plainly. What you do with it is yours." She looked at him. He looked back. "Thank you," she said finally, "for the plain truth." He nodded. She stood. She walked to the window and looked at the dark valley for a while. He waited, not pressing. "I am going to need time," she said. "You have it," he said. She turned. "And I am going to need to figure out Gregory, and the debt, and Kiana, and my family, and all of it." "Yes," he said. "We will." She looked at him. The "we" sat in the air between them. She did not correct it. "Good night, Jeremy," she said. He rose. He moved to the door. He paused there the same way he had paused at the lodge door, but this time he did turn. He looked at her across the firelit room. "For what it is worth," he said, "you have been managing everything alone for a very long time." She held his gaze. "I know," she said quietly. "You don't have to anymore." He left. Julissa stood at the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass and breathed, breathed, breathed. Below, the valley was entirely dark. Above, the stars were very bright. She stayed there for a long time. The mornings at the castle had a different quality than the lodge. At the lodge, everything had been compressed. Small spaces, close quarters, the particular intimacy of a temporary shelter that creates a world within itself. Here, the scale opened everything out, gave it room to breathe, allowed Julissa to be in the same building as Jeremy without every moment feeling like a decision. She found she liked it. She spent the first days doing things she had not had the space to do in years, walking the grounds in the early cold, thinking without an agenda, letting the mountain air work on the tightness she had been carrying in her chest. She met her parents for difficult, careful meals, during which her father was a man reorganizing his understanding of his world, and her mother cried twice in a way that seemed, oddly, like relief. She received a letter from Elder Finch, carefully worded, informing her that the Lambert family had been advised by the Alpha King's legal counsel that their claims against the Hendricks family were without merit. Elder Conrad Lambert had apparently gone very quiet upon receiving this advisement. Gregory had not. She heard this through a guard casually, in passing, the information not delivered to alarm her but simply present in the air, the way information moved at a castle this size. Gregory Lambert had been seen at the southern border of the Mackenzie territory twice in the last week. Watching. The border patrols had noted it and reported it and been told to maintain observation. "He will not cross," Jeremy had said when she brought it up. "How can you be certain?" "Because he is a man who calculates his odds," Jeremy had said. "And he is not stupid enough to miscalculate these ones." She had let it settle. Jeremy's certainties had, so far, proven to be certainties rather than wishes, but she was still thinking about it on the morning she decided to walk further than usual. The eastern face of the grounds descended through a series of stone terraces, into a lower garden where the old trees were large and the light fell differently filtered and greenish, the same quality she remembered from the forest road on her wedding day. She went there because the quality of the light felt like thinking space, and she had a great deal to think about. She was sitting on a low stone wall, watching the morning mist move through the trees below, when she heard the footsteps. She turned. Gregory Lambert stood at the entrance to the lower terrace. He was alone. He looked like a man who had been planning this for days, composed, but with something underneath the composition that was not control but its performance. The same smirk. But the eyes were different now. Not smug. Something harder. "Gregory," she said. Her voice was level. "Stay level. Julissa." He took a step forward. "You have created a great deal of trouble. You put your hands on my cousin 3 nights before our wedding," she said. "I do not believe I am the one who created the trouble." His jaw moved. "That is not. It is exactly what it is." She rose from the wall. She needed to be on her feet. "What do you want, Gregory?" "I want you to stop this theater," he said. He took another step. "Whatever game you are playing with Mackenzie, it ends here. You come home. My father has graciously agreed to overlook your behavior at the ceremony if you—" "No," she said. He stopped. The word had hit him the same way her palm had hit him at the altar, not expected. "No," she said again, because it felt good to say it clearly. "I will not come back. I will not be bonded to you. I will not pretend that what I saw in the stable did not happen. And I will not—" her voice went low and sharp— "let you threaten my family into compliance." Gregory's composure cracked along a very specific fault line. "You think he wants you?" he said, and the cruelty in it was the cruelty of a small man reaching for the most available weapon. "You think the Alpha King keeps a runaway bride for sentiment? He is using you, Julissa, for whatever political purpose you serve him. When you stop being useful—" He grabbed her wrist, not roughly enough to leave marks, carefully, roughly. The particular grip of a man who knows exactly how much force reads as persuasion and how much reads as assault. "Come with me now," he said quietly, "or I will make things very difficult for people you love." Julissa looked at his hand on her wrist. She felt something very still and very cold move through her. She had her mouth open to respond when 2 things happened in rapid sequence. Gregory's grip tightened. He had caught her stillness as hesitation, as capitulation beginning, and pulled her toward the terrace entrance. And something in Julissa's chest, deep and reflexive, below language, below thought, pulsed outward with a directness she had never felt before in her life. Not a decision, not a choice, something older and more fundamental than either. A call. Jeremy. Jeremy Mackenzie was in the North Tower going over correspondence when it hit him. There was no other word for what happened. It was not a sound, not a smell, not any of the senses he used to track in the way wolves tracked. It was something prior to senses, a pressure at the center of his chest, like a hand pressing inward. Fear, not his fear. He was across the room in one motion, through the door in 2. His captain called after him from the hallway, and he was already past the landing and moving down the stairs at a speed that had nothing to do with urgency and everything to do with instinct and the particular quality of desperation that only one thing in the world had ever created in him. He did not transform. He was moving faster on 2 legs through the castle corridors than he would have been in the time it took to shift. He hit the eastern terrace at a run. What Gregory Lambert saw come through the terrace entrance was the Alpha King at full weight and full presence, moving with the absolute zero hesitation of a man who had arrived at the conclusion of a decision he made years ago. Gregory released Julissa's wrist. He did not choose to. His hand simply opened. Jeremy crossed the terrace in 4 strides and put himself between Julissa and Gregory with the smooth, unhurried efficiency of something that moves according to physics rather than social consideration. He did not touch Gregory. He did not need to. He simply occupied the space between them and looked at Gregory Lambert with the expression of a man who has assessed a situation completely and is entirely untroubled by his own next move. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Gregory Lambert was not a coward. He had held the confidence of a man raised to command for his entire life, but he was also, as Jeremy had said, not stupid, and standing in the direct gaze of the Alpha King in his own territory, having just laid hands on the person under his protection, was not a situation in which confidence or family pedigree provided much insulation. He straightened. He adjusted his jacket. "This is not over," he said. "It is," Jeremy said. 2 words, mild as weather. Gregory held the gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Julissa, one last look that she met without blinking. Something in it was the look of a man realizing he has lost something he never deserved. He left. Julissa waited until the sound of his footsteps faded. Then she let out her breath. Jeremy turned from the terrace entrance and looked at her. His eyes went immediately to her wrist, the one Gregory had held. She was not holding it. She had her arms at her sides, deliberately, but he saw it anyway. Something moved in his expression, deep and controlled. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," she said. He didn't. She stopped, looked at him. "How did you know I was here?" Jeremy was quiet. She looked at him steadily. "Jeremy, how did you know?" He held her gaze, and in his eyes she saw it, the thing she had been trying to name, the depth she had been trying to trace, the current running below the surface, the thing that had been there from the first moment in the carriage, present and patient and waiting. "I felt you," he said. The words fell into the silence of the terrace like stones into still water. "What does that mean?" she asked, but she already knew. She had the sensation again, not thought but something prior to thought, of something coming into focus, something that had been trying to be clear for days. "It means," Jeremy said, very quietly, "that what I told you last night about the market, about the gathering, about all of it." He paused. "There is a reason it is more than what it sounds like." She felt it moving through her. Not new, it was not new. It had been there in the carriage, in the warmth of the coat, in the hand at her back, in the pull she felt in rooms he entered, in the particular quality of his name in her mouth, in the way his presence settled something in her that had been unsettled since before she could remember. "Say it," she said. "You are my mate," Jeremy said. "The true one, the real bond." He held her gaze without flinching. Gregory Lambert's claim was political. Fabricated by Elder Conrad, with Gregory's knowledge, using falsified documentation, there was never a genuine bond. A pause. You were never his. The world did not crack open. There was no thunder. There was just Julissa, standing on a stone terrace in the morning light, with the valley below and the mountains above, and this man, this particular patient, careful, honest man telling her a truth. She realized she had been living in the edges of since the moment she fell through his carriage door. She thought about the scent of him in the carriage, that pull she had noticed and not named. She thought about his hand at her back and the quality of certainty it carried. She thought about every moment of the past week in which something had felt, quietly, like recognition. She pressed her eyes shut for a moment. "You knew this from the beginning," she said. "From the carriage." "Yes." "You didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" She opened her eyes. "Jeremy, why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because you had just escaped a man who used a bond, real or false, to claim ownership over you. Because you needed to be certain that anything that came next was a choice. Yours. Completely." He paused. "The bond is real. What you do with it must be real too. I will not have you come to me because a biological instinct says so. I need you to come to me because you say so. Julissa looked at him. She thought about Gregory Lambert standing at the altar with that proprietary smile, "You are mine, and we both know it." She thought about the difference between that and this. She crossed the terrace to him. She stopped close enough that she could see the precise quality of his expression, the absolute composure with something underneath it that was not composure at all, something held very carefully in check. She reached up and put her palm against his jaw, not hitting him this time, just there. His eyes closed for a half second. Just that. "I need more time," she said quietly, "to be certain on my terms." "The way you said, 'I know,'" he said. His hand came up and covered hers against his jaw, not gripping, just holding. "But I am not running from this," she said. "I know," he said again. She stood there for a moment, his jaw in her palm, his hand over hers, the mountain cold and clean around them. Then she lowered her hand. He let her go. "Tell me everything about the false documentation," she said. "I want to know exactly what Gregory and his father did." Jeremy looked at her, and in his eyes was something that was not possessiveness, not triumph, but something quieter and deeper and far more sustainable. Pride. "Come inside," he said. "I'll have everything brought." She nodded. She walked beside him back toward the castle. Not behind him, not in front, beside. The legal work took 12 days. Jeremy's counsel was meticulous. 3 advocates who moved through documents the way surgeons move through complex work, precise and dispassionate, and entirely clear about the outcomes. The falsified bonding documentation that Elder Conrad Lambert had commissioned 8 years ago, 8 years, long before Julissa and Gregory had even met, was surfaced, verified, and submitted to the Pack Council with a formal complaint attached. Elder Conrad Lambert's response had been to attempt a counterfiling. His response to the counterfiling had been silence. His response to the Alpha King's personal appearance before the council, with full documentation and the particular quality of patient thoroughness that Jeremy brought to everything he put his name on, had been retirement from the council chair. Gregory had not appeared at the hearings. Julissa was present at all of them. She sat beside Jeremy's counsel, and she read every document, and she asked every clarifying question, and she made notes in her careful, small handwriting, and she felt with every day that passed, with every layer of the deception that was exposed to clean air, something slowly unknotting in her chest. The hold Gregory Lambert had claimed over her family was dissolved formally on the 9th day. She told her parents by letter, because she wanted them to have the privacy of receiving it without her watching. Her father wrote back. It was the first letter he had sent her in years that did not contain either a request or an instruction. Just, "I am sorry it took me so long to see what you always knew." She held that letter for a while. Kiana came to the castle on the 11th day. Julissa had not summoned her. She had come of her own arrangement, arriving pale and thin-looking, the confident Cousinese entirely gone, standing in the entrance hall with her hands clasped and her eyes on the floor. Julissa met her alone. Jeremy had offered his presence. She had declined. She looked at her cousin and felt the complicated landscape of loving someone who has hurt you. It was not simple. It was never going to be simple. "You sent him the letter," she said. "Yes." Kiana's voice was barely audible. "Why?" A long pause. Then, "Because Gregory said he would marry me, if I helped him get you back." She pressed her lips together. "I know how it sounds." It sounded exactly like what it was, a woman making a terrible choice for a man who was not worth it. Julissa had spent years around that particular species of decision. She understood the mechanism of it, even as it had cut her deeply. "He lied to you," she said. Kiana's eyes finally came up. She nodded once. "He was always going to lie to you," Julissa said, not cruelly, just plainly. Men like Gregory Lambert do not change their nature for different women. They simply find a different use for the same nature. Kiana was crying. She was trying not to, and losing. Julissa looked at her, this girl she had grown up alongside, this blood relative. This person who had laughed in the stable while Gregory's hands were at her waist and then 3 days later whispered, "You deserve every happiness," and felt something move through her that was not forgiveness exactly. Not yet, but not the closed door that she had feared. "I cannot forget what you did," Julissa said. "I won't pretend to. But I am not." She paused. "I am not Gregory Lambert. I do not collect debts." Kiana was weeping openly now. Julissa looked at her for a moment longer. Then she crossed the floor and took her cousin's hands. "We will need time," she said, "both of us, to figure out what this can be now." She held the wet, shaking hands. "But we will figure it out." It was not absolution. It was not resolution. But it was an open door. On the 14th morning, Julissa found Jeremy at the high point of the castle, grounds a stone promontory that jutted from the mountainside, giving a view across the entire valley in 3 directions. He came here in the mornings, she had learned, before the day organized itself around its demands. Just him and the mountain and the early light. She climbed up and stood beside him. Below, the valley was beginning to catch the first angle of sun. It moved across it slowly, golden and deliberate, the shadow retreating ahead of it toward the western face. They stood in silence for a while. "The council has formally dissolved the Lambert documentation," she said. "Yes. My family's debt obligations to the Lambert estate are nullified. Yes. Gregory is under formal censure pending further review. Yes." She looked at him. He was watching the valley with the unhurried quality she had come to associate entirely with him, not passivity but patience. The quality of someone who trusts time. "So," she said. He turned his head and looked at her. "So," she said again, "I have had time." She looked at the valley. The sun had reached the middle of it now, turning the river to silver light. "I have had time to think about everything you told me, about the market, about the gathering, about all of it." She paused. "About the bond." She felt him go very still beside her. "I spent 4 years," she said carefully, "convincing myself that what I was doing was practical, necessary, that love was a luxury and survival was the priority. I told myself that story very convincingly. I almost believed it." She glanced at him. "I did not believe it." "I know," he said softly. "I am not the same person I was 2 weeks ago," she said. "I think I am the person I was before all the careful management, before I decided that duty and survival were the same thing as being alive." She turned to face him. "I think I have been asleep for about 4 years, and I woke up when I hit you at a diplomatic gathering." His mouth shifted. That precise, private movement she had come to love. The smile that he mostly managed to keep internal, but occasionally couldn't. "What I feel when I am in the same room as you," she said, "is not the bond. I know what the bond feels like. It is that low pull, that recognition. But this is different. This is..." She stopped, chose words. "This is me. Choosing. Knowing what I am choosing, and why." Jeremy turned fully toward her. She looked at him, all of him. The careful precision and the deep patience, and the fire underneath both of those things. The fire he had been managing since a market in the south, when he stopped a royal column, and could not explain why. "I am choosing this," she said. "You. This. Whatever it becomes. On my terms. Because I want to." Jeremy Mackenzie, the alpha king of the Northern Territories, who had never once since she'd met him allowed anything to show on his face that he did not intend to show, looked at her, and what she saw in his face in that moment was something she had no name for, something that had nothing to do with power or authority or the careful management of an image, something entirely personal, entirely real. He raised his hand and brushed the back of it against her cheek, light, brief, the gentlest possible touch. "Julissa," he said, just her name, the way her name sounded when he said it. She took his face in both hands the way she had done on the terrace, but with none of the tentativeness, all of the intention, and she kissed him. It was not the kiss of a slow burn finally released, though it was that. It was not the kiss of a bond fulfilling its nature, though it was that too. It was something more specific, and more important, the deliberate, eyes-open act of a woman who had spent 4 years managing other people's necessities and had finally, at last, chosen something entirely her own. He kissed her back with the same quality he did everything completely. No performance, no calculation, just the full and unhurried truth of him. When she pulled back, the sun had moved, and the valley was entirely gold, and he was looking at her the way she imagined he had looked at her since a market in the south, and it no longer frightened her at all. "I should tell you," she said, slightly breathless, "that I am still very capable of hitting you if you say something presumptuous." "I remember," he said, and the smile was there, fully present, no longer mostly internal. She laughed. The sound surprised her, real and unmanaged, coming up from somewhere beneath all the careful layers. She laughed at the sky and the valley and the improbability of all of it. His arms came around her from behind, easy, warm, entirely unhurried, and she leaned back into the solid certainty of him and looked at the golden valley spread out below. 3 months later. The ceremony was small. That had been Julisa's specific, non-negotiable request. Not in a ceremonial hall with 200 witnesses, and incense thick enough to choke on, and corsets that cut into ribs, and the weight of other people's necessities pressing down from every direction. Not a performance of permanence for an audience. Just the people who mattered. The castle courtyard in early morning light. Her parents, her father holding her mother's hand for the first time in years. The two of them looking at their daughter with an expression she had not seen from them before. Simple, uncomplicated joy, with nothing underneath it wanting anything. Her brother Reginald, whose treatments were now fully funded, and who had arrived thin and bright-eyed, and who had looked at Jeremy with the frank measuring gaze of someone who had decided that his sister's choices deserved examination, and had spent 2 days examining, and had arrived at his verdict via a conversation that Julissa was not present for, but whose outcome she could read in the way her brother shook Jeremy's hand. Blaze, Kimura, a handful of pack members from Jeremy's inner circle, Elder Finch, who had officiated at the disastrous ceremony 3 months ago, and who now stood with the expression of someone who was glad to be given the opportunity to do the occasion properly. Kiana was not there. That was still being figured out, slowly, in the careful way that true damage is addressed, not ignored, not forced, but genuinely worked through. There would be time. Julissa wore a dress the color of deep water, nothing ivory, nothing ceremonial, just something she had chosen because she wanted to. It was lighter than the wedding gown had been, lighter than anything she had worn in years. She walked to Jeremy on her own, not on her father's arm. Not conducted, not transferred, not delivered. She walked to him herself, in her own time. The morning light coming through the old trees of the courtyard, and when she reached him, she took his hands in both of hers. He looked at her the way he always looked at her when they were alone, as though the rest of the world was backdrop. Elder Finch spoke the vows. The real ones. The ancient ones that didn't have anything to do with debt or duty or social repair. When it came to her part, she said the words clearly and steadily and entirely, without the sensation of being slowly compressed. She said them to him. She meant them to him. After, when the small gathering had moved to the tables set in the courtyard for breakfast, and her father was talking to Jeremy's captain, with the ease of a man who has recently been relieved of a very heavy bag, and her mother was crying again in a way that was clearly entirely happy, and Reginald was eating the entire contents of a bread basket with the appetite of someone making up for lost time. Jeremy came and stood beside her at the edge of the courtyard, where it overlooked the valley. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "No regrets?" She looked at him sidelong. "I regret," she said, "approximately 0% of the things that led me to your carriage." He looked at the valley. "Even the wedding dress?" "The wedding dress was excellent," she said. "Very good for running in, once you gathered the skirt." He laughed. She had, in 3 months, collected Jeremy Mackenzie's laughs the way someone collects rare things, each one catalogued, each one evidence of the fire underneath the stone, each one specifically hers. She leaned against him. His arm came around her. Below, the valley was just waking. the mist moving through the low ground, the river catching the first of the morning light. "I spent 4 years preparing to survive," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "I think I would like to try something else now." He pressed his lips to her hair. Brief, warm. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. She looked at the valley, the mist, the light. The whole wide, open, unscheduled morning. "Living," she said. His arm tightened around her. Below, the valley went gold. She didn't run from love. She ran toward the right alpha. Thank you for watching Ariel Romance Library. If this story reached something in you, subscribe, share, and let us know in the comments what moment kept you here.